So this is session 4. Basically, we're getting into section 2 now of the book. So the reading for this was chapter 5 and up to section 3 of chapter 6, where Alina and Richard make the oath at the end of seeing their father in prison. There's a lot of really interesting things that have happened just in these 100 and some pages. So one thing that has happened is specifically in following the story of Alina and Richard, we've met the Jews as like a separate class of people. And so to that end, Bobby has a presentation that he's going to give on currency, because at this point in time, there isn't any to the extent that there's any standardized centralized currency, it's very weakly enforced. And there's not really any standardized merchant class or exchanges or any capital markets. And so there's this open question of how do people actually exchange goods and services? With that, Bobby, feel free to take it away. And I'll just kind of lean back and we can talk about things at the end.
Yeah, let me figure out how to share my screen here. I haven't actually done this in this interface. This good?
Yep.
All righty. Interestingly, the system that ended up being used by the Brits in the Angevin era survived for a very long time, much longer than one would expect, basically until the 1970s. But as none of us were there using it, I thought I'd better put some of it in context, because probably the only real reference point that any of us have for it is Mary Poppins, or other sort of dated period pieces where people refer to shillings and sixpence and that sort of thing, and and references here from Pillars of the Earth. So when people start talking about pence, or you may have more recent references to people using shillings and sixpence and other sorts of coinage that sound nonsensical to people who use modern decimal-based currency. Well, as this essay would indicate, the references to money in Pillars of the Earth are possibly a bit confusing. So what I wanted to do was try to put Angevin money a bit in context, and make this a little more relatable for the reader. As I say herein, it is clear that pence are not large money. It's what you use on a daily basis. And similarly, that when people start making reference to pounds, that's big bucks. But when people say, I want 100 pounds for this, what is 100 pounds actually worth? That's not really intuitive to the reader. And, is that like asking for 10 grand? Is that like asking for $1 million? It's not really clear how much of a bribe the royals are demanding for some of these favors. And so I wanted to just try to put some color around that. And then likewise, what we'll encounter here is there's also some coinage that does not fit the system. There is a money belt of Byzance that is brought up. The Byzance, for those unfamiliar with this, are gold pieces. For those of you who play Dungeons and Dragons, which is probably everybody I've encountered, the Brits don't actually have those, but they fit in this story, and they play an important point herein for at least a little while. And they should be fairly valuable. So one needs to figure out, well, what ought this be worth correspondingly? Where is this going to take our protagonists? And just how much of a fuss should this be as compared to the fuss that was made a couple chapters earlier over the relative value of a pig?
Yeah, wasn't the pig like worth 50 pence or something like that? I don't remember anymore.
Yeah. Yes, I think it was 50 or 60 pence. However, that's sort of putting in context what the lifestyle of a peasant is, as opposed to an earl or an earl's daughter. But even a jailed earl has squirreled away a money belt worth what turns out to be quite a bit, or ought to be quite a bit if, well, as you will see in the story, um, turns out to be jack all. But uh, as so many things in the story, this is our narrator is telling a story of bad things happen to good people. Fundamentally, the economic system here is based on pounds, shilling, and pence. Let's start there. Theoretically, £1 sterling is roughly valued as the same as a pound of silver. Approximately, that should be based at £1 is worth 12 pence. From there, 20 shillings to a pound. So the pound then breaks down to 240 pence. There's a larger breakdown of coins that I will show you further down on this presentation, which turns out to be a lot more comprehensible to your average individual because it goes up by twos and threes, thus requiring a lot less math for any individual, and was in fact the reason that England stayed with this system for 900 years. But of course, as one sees, the reason that they went to this system in the first place was Rome. The silver standard in the first place came from Rome. It was the librum, the solidae, and the denare was almost literally adopted straight over from the Frankish system, Frankish kingdoms. You could make a reasonable case that it possibly came over when the Romans conquered Britain, but the coinage actually doesn't line up. But nonetheless, the Roman currency pretty directly maps over. So this English currency system is actually probably dating back to at least Caesar, which is, I think, hilarious for all of us who've studied history back that far, and then probably actually goes back to the Roman Republic before that. I don't actually know when the Romans went to the silver standard off the top of my head, but I want to say it was about 380 BC. Don't quote me on that. It's sort of impressive to think that this particular currency system had lived for about 2,000 years, and that the pence, albeit not with that particular face on it, not with that particular denomination of value, but roughly this means of interchange, and likewise that rough denomination of relative values of coinage and interchange between denominations has been approximately the same for an awful lot of recorded Western civilization. Let me touch briefly on the Byzants, as they're sort of the outlying bit here, as the Byzantine coin here. They don't fit because, well, they're gold rather than silver. They're somewhat smaller, but gold is inherently somewhat more valuable, and ultimately, they're valued basically on the precious metal more than they are the face value of the coin. You could take them to any honest money changer, and orthogonally here, you're not going to find a money changer in medieval England or anywhere in medieval Europe who isn't a Jew. And if you needed to find someone to change this currency who wasn't a money changer, you would take it to a jeweler to sell it for precious metal value, who is also a Jew. So either way, you're engaging in what's basically a precious metal transaction. So you're selling it either to a goldsmith or a money changer. But they're going to give you, if they're honest and they think you're a legitimate businessman and not a thief, something relatively close to the value of the material. There's a source here if you're curious about this, and I will upload this document for anyone who cares to dig further into any of this. There's a great deal of curious information about the Byzantines and the Crusader currency that was, in a lot of respects, more advanced than what we have out here at the very western edge of civilization, especially since Angevin England is, as you will see from what's depicted in the storyline, kind of praying, right? Because it's in the depths of civil war. Things are not well, and there's periodic famines, conflict of differing kings, many different political rivals, quite a bit of controversy over what's going on, who's in charge, and even who's authorized to collect and or mint currency. All that being the case, it's not as if much of the rest of Europe is enormously stable at this point either. Let's step forward and talk about what coins are worth, by which I mean it's all metal. What is relative income? So if a skilled laborer earns about 4 pence a day, and even if you're really aggressive and hardworking, you simply can't work every day. Virtually have to take Sundays off because no one will employ you then. And there are quite a number of holidays as well. So if you're Tom Builder or some other extremely skilled laborer, you might be able to bank away 4.5 pounds a year if you were very miserly. And one presumes you also have to live and support a family out of that. And well, frankly, you haven't got a place safe to keep it anyway. So, in the sense that you do actually want to save that, you tend to save it by buying hard property, land, something that's not readily stolen from you. And even then, it's likely to be, relatively speaking, taxed away from you. Just for comparison, that's kind of the absolute best you could do as a skilled laborer. From what we've seen in the storyline, that's uncommon. There's a great deal of laziness. There's a great deal of folks who do not proceed to do that. Similarly, nobility do better. A knight with a good bit of land ownings might come back with 10 times that. But some of the expenditures that they will have will end up being higher than you might expect, particularly if your economic familiarity here is based on, let's say, Dungeons and Dragons. exceedingly good horse or comparably a good suit of armor are going to be higher than what you'd think from what Gary Gygax taught us all. It's going to be a distorting factor compared to what one might typically have as income today. Think of the comparison as being that your skilled laborer lives in the same realm as sort of a higher end tradesman, an electrician or a plumber or that sort of thing. Whereas the knight is going to be in the realm of a landlord, collecting rents from a variety of folks lower on the chain, predominantly living on that, as opposed to by any sort of means of their own income. So, bringing that back to the original question, then, your demand for £100 is about like asking for about £1.25 million, maybe as much as $1.5 million, as far as modern purchasing power goes. So, when we're talking about the king and queen or the various aspirants to the throne in Pillars of the Earth, they're all looking for an edge. Fighting over the throne is expensive, as you've probably all learned from watching Game of Thrones. But they're also aware that they can't go out to these relatively provincial figures and say, "Why don't you give me 30 million bucks?" Because that they're perfectly aware that none of these guys have it. So they're just trying to figure out, all right, well, what can I hold somebody up for the for the privilege of becoming sheriff over this dinky little provincial region? And so they're trying to figure out, all right, well, where can I extract a bit of money from here and there? That's the way the system gets done, right? Now, let me return to the concept that I had earlier, which is there are a variety of coins that we don't primarily see in this story, because a lot of them aren't actually minted in the Angevin era. They are used as bank currency, and banks aren't even all that prevalent here, or they just come into circulation later in the British system. But I'm putting this in here just for everyone's reference because, well, frankly, we've all seen these in other storyline. This will be useful for contextualizing this into the reference points of, well, how does this fit into stories of battles in the Caribbean or paying your British Marines to go fight in Tortuga? The points to make on this particular section here is these denominations go up in 2s and 3s, specifically because people were seen as being so simplistic that people were incapable of counting particularly high. So you count 1 farthing, 2 farthings, and you get to a halfpenny. 2 halfpennies, get to a penny. 1, 2, 3 pennies, get to a threepenny. So that you did not have to be able to count to 10. And the Brits deliberately did not go to decimalization. It was considered that counting was a skill that most people did not particularly have. You actually see some reference to this in Pillars of the Earth, where when people are trying to count up how many pounds they have, they end up stacking them onto pieces of cloth and stacking them a dozen high in order to effectively count their pence, because most people don't actually have counting skills, and that isn't called out, but it's sort of phenomenal to think about, just how that's all taken for granted for us. And now everyone looks around and says, why wouldn't you know all of that? We've got 10 fingers. We all know how to count to 10. In Pillars of the Earth, you will mostly have pence and pounds, and occasional references to other coins. There's simply a distinction between peasant currencies of pence and noble currencies of pounds, but there's there's just not a lot of interchange in between them because um, there one does not pull out a $1,000 bill to buy things at 7. Similarly, one does not typically make rent by pulling out a huge stack of quarters and asking the landlord to count it. But that's theoretically possible, but in practice, highly unlikely. So I will leave it at that for the moment and turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thanks. That was really good.
We can,
Yeah, if you have like a link to it too, I'll put it in this Notion page, because this is kind of our master list, and that way people
it's
can.
just a Word document, but yeah, you can make a link out of it or whatever the case may be.
Okay. Yeah.
Anything's good.
The thing I was thinking about as you were giving this presentation was, and again, this becomes relevant later in the book, but like if you're a knight, you have to fund your own like horses and weapons and other sorts of things. And so you basically, like, it makes sense. Either you have to come from like a noble family or you have to find somebody else to, like, in the case of the book, as we'll see, like, you have to find another way to make money so that you can actually buy your own things. And that's like, I mean, you
There's
see that in Greek
between
times.
knights and men at arms, right? And men at arms are effectively mercenaries, right? They are both paid to show up, and they must be provisioned with arms and armor, whereas knights are obligated to show up and come with their own retinue. But they have, similarly, the social obligation, not the social obligation to show up, but they also have the social authority and the lands and social position to go and collect taxes or otherwise have holdings that they use to support themselves.
Unless they get displaced from having possession of it.
That does indeed happen.
And they'll lose income stream. Do either of you, Theon or Barnacle, have any questions or any commentary? Did you two guys have anything to say before we start talking about other aspects of the reading this time?
Nothing too in depth, just it's interesting how they're mostly sticking to silver because of its divisibility, or it's contra gold, which most of these people are not going to be able to don't even have the asset values that would warrant any level of gold. So that was interesting to kind of think about as you were going over that.
Well, and the Brits don't have it, right? I mean,
yeah, the Bezants and what have you are exotic for that reason, not just because they're from Byzantium, but the gold in and of itself. I also thought it was interesting that you brought up Bobby, Game of Thrones, and the lack of the Iron Bank, and at this time we're still waiting for the Fuggers and the Medici a century or two later, 2 or 3 later, to start materializing and playing their larger role in some of these machinations of nobility. But it was interesting for me to think about, because they don't have these institutions, how they're going to go about raising the funds to engage in all of this stuff. So yeah, it was a good presentation, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That was interesting.
Sure thing. I shall stop distracting all of you and let us get back to the book.
Oh, no, it's not a distraction. I'm going to just spend a couple minutes going over, because related to this, which is relevant to, for example, how Alina and Richard are supposed to make money, different types of oaths. And we don't have to spend too long on this, but I think there's a couple of really funny things. So I just went to like Venice AI and asked, just because I wanted to try it out to see if it worked, and I asked it about different types of oaths in medieval England. Can you guys see my?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So you can see like there's all these, I'll just read through them quickly. Fealty oath, homage oath, marriage oath, a religious oath, oath of allegiance, oath of supremacy, oath of office, oath of peace, oath of witness, oath of feud. This is the funniest. Like you can actually take an oath that you're going to fight somebody and then you have to fulfill that. Oath of trade, oath of guild, oath of chivalry, and oath of excommunication. So some of these, like fealty and homage, you can see are like specific to like men. Most of these are like the only one that's private. If you look at the list, is oath of trade. So it's like you can tell it's like a very different type of society than what we're living in because most oaths nowadays would be private and not very many are public. So I'll just go through them like step by step. So a fealty oath is basically a vassal swearing fealty to a lord. So someone has to witness this. It says lifetime. These say lifetime, but of course, life is full of betrayals for all of these oaths. You know, you can swear fealty to somebody else or, you know, your vassal. I actually am not clear on the distinction between like a fealty and an homage. It seems like the homage is more ceremonial, but like I guess like fealty is more like military and homage is more religious. So like if you swore loyalty to like a lord, like there would be two aspects of it. There would be a more like vassalage aspect and a more like religious aspect. Marriage is just pretty well defined in the church. I'm gonna skip that one. Religious, this one is involved in like you know, promises, you know, like I guess we see like Ellen leaves, for example, because you know she's not married to Tom, and there's drama around that. And then also there's the religious oaths that are separate from marriage oaths that are usually for monks that are again for poverty, chastity, and obedience. And men and women, monks and nuns have separate oaths that they take if they live in a convent versus a monastery. Oath of allegiance. This is usually applied to the monarch. And again, like it says lifetime, but you know, if the king changes, you know, everybody has to, or if there's betrayal or something like that, and there's power games, you'll have to see people ally themselves differently. Oath of supremacy is related to like acknowledging that the king is the head of the church. So it's like I'm loyal first and foremost to the crown, like my king is the supreme ruler of the lands and the church, which again, we're still in like Catholic times, so that's still a thing. Oath of office is relatively straightforward. Like, you know, policemen or sheriffs or anybody else is in official capacity, someone who administers to a university would take an oath of office. An oath of peace is to keep defense and peace within a community. Oath of witness, we still have these actually, like if you have to get something notarized, you know, that's technically an oath of witness. This is hilarious. Oath of feud. Take an oath to like feud with you to make sure that we resolve our conflict. That's like pretty funny in my opinion because like I just would not be used to that. Like I would think the oath would be to like come to a solution, but no, it's like the oath is that we're actually going to fight each other. Oath of trade, again, this is the only one that's private, and I think it's because, you know, as Bobby was talking about, a lot of like trade stuff is really happening either on the margins or like basically only with Jews. And so, you know, there's not really many oaths of trade. And then oath of
By the way,
guild.
does everyone understand why it's happening only with Jews?
Oh, because of usury, like Christianity bans usury and loans.
Yeah, is that generally understood? There's there's a papal ban on interest
Yeah.
and usury, so one can't lend with interest at all,
Yeah.
which leads to any number of things being de facto banned, which
Yeah.
includes
Which again,
basically
another
any sort of
problem, you know, you can see the seeds of sowing dissent between like state and church because the Anglican people are a very merchant people. They're very practical, you know, money earning people. And so if, you know, in time we're going to see like you can't run an island society that is based on imports and exports and naval supremacy if you can't have interest. Like you just see all of these seeds being sown on conflict that's going to emerge. Because you like Anglican society, like the British society cannot exist without, that sort of situation. So,
And the Italians invent this way around it, and then everybody clones it. Which is basically, you end up with partnerships where I'm going to buy into a piece of your trade where I'm going to bankroll your venture, and I'll get a third of your profits.
yeah, this is
And
like the origin of like limited liability corporations, all of that, and
yes,
yeah. So, and then to continue, oath of guild is for free like workmen in a guild. Oath of chivalry is knights swearing to uphold chivalric values, which William fails to do quite often.
oh my God, so badly.
And then there's an oath of excommunication. So if you break your religious vow, you actually take an oath that you will no longer ever return to the church. So I don't think Ellen has done one of these, but if supposing she were a nun, she would take an oath of excommunication, and she would never again allowed to be a part of the church. I will share this. I'll share screenshots, or I'll share something like this. But I continue to ask, like, the AI, like, when are these oaths broken and rewritten? Because these happen all the time. Like they say lifetime, but obviously, they change. But yeah, I think the funniest one was like oath of feud, which is like because like you will actually get ostracized if you don't uphold your feud if you take an oath of feud. So I tried to
They
find
call
some
you
historical
pussy and kick you out.
examples. I tried to find some historical examples of what that would look like, but I wasn't able to. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because at the end, if you remember when Alina and Richard are visiting their father in prison, basically the father makes them both take an oath, right? That swear as long as you shall live, that you will do whatever it takes to get the earldom back. And of course, Alina throws an internal tantrum because it's like, why is it because I'm a girl? Like I have to be strung along in this process when my brother is like hopeless at basically anything. Because after she gets kicked after the rape, and after she gets kicked out, like they're running all along, and like he's useless. He can't do anything. And she's like desperately trying to figure out. And then at the end of all of that, where she displays a lot more agency, she's like, what the fuck, man? Like, I have to take an oath so that he gets the property back. Like, what is this bullshit? Let's segue.
Yeah, I
this.
really want to see that be her villain origin moment, but anyway.
So we'll start that with that. Like maybe since you guys haven't had a chance to participate, let's talk about that. Like, what do you guys feel about that? Is that like fair, unfair? Like, do you think? Like, what was your opinion on like going through all of having them basically go through all of that suffering, and then basically like what their father said to them? Like, what do you guys think about that?
I mean, it feels very yeah, I would be pretty pissed too. I'd be very, very pissed, especially since I was the one that basically kept him alive up until this point, and you're gonna have to be the one to carry his ass all the way to their other grandparents' house or whatever. Yeah, I would have not been happy either. It kind of is funny because it also kind of plays into what you were saying with the oath, where there's a bunch of oaths, and a bunch of them can be where both genders can take them, but there's like none specifically for women, which I thought was kind of goofy. I would feel like there should be at least one that's just for women versus women or some BS like that.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah, there's no like oaths that women have to take with regards to other women. That's really interesting.
Yeah,
There's a vow of nunnery, but I mean that didn't make it into this list. But yeah.
yeah. Okay. Just a quick to step to the side on the oaths. So if someone was to like break an oath, for instance, like let's just say like Bartholomew didn't follow through with his oath to the other king, and he just decided to flip. Would they basically have to kick him out or do something, or would his oath be forgiven in like a court of law? Did it get into any detail about that, or are you just supposed to ride down with the ship if you commit?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. there are people who, and we'll see later in the book, basically there tends to be a lot of backstabbing that goes on. And so basically the highest punishment, so like let's say like the king wants an oath of supremacy to recognize him as the king. Like at some point, like if you don't take it and you act against the state interest to a large degree, you'll get charged and hanged as a traitor. But like since again we're in this period of anarchy, like a lot of this comes down to enforcement will, I think, which is I think what makes this book really interesting, because like there's all this like jockeying for power and stuff, and there's all these like rules about like who should swear fealty and supremacy and allegiance to who, but like so much of this stuff comes down to like enforcement power, and if you're lacking it, there's not much you can do. Like if you're like a knight or an earl, or let's say like you're a big like lord and you have like knights that defect or something like that, like unless you have other knights to like kidnap them and take that person to task, like nothing's gonna happen. Similarly to like, like at this point, since Richard and Alina like have no land and they've been stripped of their title basically, not officially yet, the king has to recognize that like they have no enforcement power, even if they have claim to like riches and other things. And so I think the larger answer to that is yes, there's an official process, and like yes, like let's say you were found as a traitor, you'd probably have to go to court and be decided, but like there's limited time and energy, and a lot of these noble people are focused on basically securing their own holdings in a time where there really isn't a lot of like stability to go around.
Interesting. But yeah, back to Elena being pissed off that she's gonna have to be the carrier for this idiot, which is kind of a funny trope that keeps popping up in the book a lot, is women have to carry lame dudes to the finish line because of assumed tradition and law.
Yeah, there's a lot of male helplessness. It's very sad. Like,
yeah,
you count the number of people who aren't helpless, and it's like, well, Tom is clearly not. Like, he is alpha. He's in charge of his shit. To the degree that he can find work. Philip is pretty good at this, and he's starting to step into his power. We see Jack a little bit, not quite yet, but like Jack has agency. All these other folks, though, they just are like sitting around like dumb goldfish.
Well said, my friend.
yeah. I mean, go ahead.
No, I have nothing to say.
But yeah, I was it is fun and funny that he keeps going from the perspective of the women in the story. Usually that's ends up, for a lot of at least like modern writing in books, it ends up being kind of this like uninteresting thing, that where it's this kind of like it's written almost as like this man's version of how a woman would think if they were having to deal with how they think a woman would deal with a lazy man. But I think